Hi, I'm Wild Bill, and I do stuff like this because, hey, this is what I do. I'm glad I have a chance. But right now, I want to talk about Neanderthal man. That's right, Neanderthal man. Homo neanderthalensis. There's an apostrophe in there somewhere. We show him looking brutish, big nosed, you know, jutting jaw and slow forehead. But it really isn't the appearance, that's just the appearance that some people like to give him because it's part of an ongoing subconscious attempt by humans to idolize themselves. The original concept of evolution was that, and then humans are the pinnacle. And we now have proven away from that. It looks like, as a matter of fact, human evolution has peaked. So anyway, some years ago. Um, but I want to talk about Homo neanderthalensis. Some of the other hominids or humanoids or Homo species. There's Homo floresiensis, I think it is, and they are called the hobbits, the little people. They lived in several places, co-extant with Homo sapiens. That's us. And Neanderthalensis also lived in close proximity, sometimes in the same generic area as Homo sapiens. There were some others. I think Homo erectus at one time was synonymous with our ecology and our history. So there are credible sources for myths about inhuman men, inhuman monsters that look like men, inhuman changelings, things in the night, the little people, ogres, orcs, something unhuman. The light elves, the Vanir. The Norse have a tradition of that, the Aesir and the Vanir. Yeah. And the Vanir were conquered, but they brought much of light and goodness to the Aesir culture. And that's what I'm going to talk about. It is my firm contention, without any evolutionary or genetic knowledge, this is off the top of my head, please don't hold me responsible for scientific heresy, other than that an artist looks into things and sees relationships and tries to draw from them a link with a reality that others may not see, that may exist. And in this case, I think I've got it. Look around. Look at Homo sapiens everywhere in the world. Darker skin than mine, darker eyes than mine, darker hair than mine. That's right. The human race has got black or brown hair and darker brown eyes and slightly darker skin, more melanin in the skin. That's good for you. It helps protect you against skin cancer. So, well, what about these small populations? They've grown in some places, but really small populations of white-skinned, blue-eyed, green-eyed, golden-eyed. I've seen some. Bonnie Pans, love you, baby. And other light hair and color and coloration tropes. Where do these come from? Well, it is my firm contention that they are genetically brought to us through the Neanderthal lines. That Neanderthals had different qualities. I may or may not have selected for them. I have an objection to the natural selection theory. I'm pretty sure it's no longer as widely accepted as it was. But I have reasons for why I disagree. That are not in the scientific literature. I understand human nature, which is something different than the scientific literature, which is written by other humans who have no cognizance of their species bias. I do because, many years in psychiatrist's couch, I had to go on a journey of self-analysis and self-discovery that lasted for many years, is still ongoing. This is the detritus from that long experience now that you see speaking to you. But I believe that those things, they come to the human race through the Neanderthals. Perhaps Homo floresiensis and other very close human relations, other Homo genus, walking apes. And that explains a lot of things. That explains why we have certain variations that there is no other explanation for. That's why we see these small insular populations like the Scots and the Irish, where those appearances are selected for and where there's a lot of inbreeding, and so those appearances are magnified, and the double recessive recombinant gene thing happens. That brings you your very unique look. It also brings you your many genetic defects. Yeah, the Tudors were rife with insanity and every kind of physical defect. The Habsburgs, same thing. The Habsburg jaw, the Habsburg pee-pee. These are important parts of our history. And of course the light hair, light eyes and all, which you'll see often attributed to the Vikings, the Finns, the Northmen, right? And where did those come from in those people? Well, it's adaptation to the lower light conditions. You don't need as much. Yeah, but there's no reason for the body to waste its time getting rid of things that it already has. There's no selecting against it. You still get a sunburn in the Arctic. So some of that stuff doesn't really hold together, I believe, under suitable scrutiny. If you just buy into it, hey, it all makes sense as the guy blurbs it out to you and you write it down in your notebook. But if you consider some of it, you think like, wait, where did that unusual blood and hair come from? Well, it came from the Neanderthals. There was a substantial population of Neanderthals. And as we grew and grew and pushed the other hominids out, they went to the more and more inhospitable places. Yeah. And so the Norse have traditions, cultural traditions of light elves. Light, get it? Light elves. Yeah, that were not human. They also have traditions of giants, Jotun. Yeah, which may or may not be the Jutes. That would be giants, and it would be Jotun, and they would be Utes, I believe, Germanic languages. But places where lived larger men. Now I have something else to say about that, pardon me. I also have a concurrent theory, which is probably very widely shared in certain circles, that the myths of the Nephilim, the myths of giants, the myths of the Jotun, the myths of giant people, giant men, all come from exposed bones of dinosaurs and mammals from the past. Our ancestors saw them just like we see them in museums. They came upon them in the wild where stone would wear away or crack off. And they'd be like, crap, what the hell is that? And then come up with an idea for how that happened. How do you get a giant thing that, like, you're now going to call a dragon embedded in stone? Well, there must have been a war between creatures so much more powerful than us that there's no identifying with them. We'll call them gods or spirits or kami. And so all these myths. However, there is a credible vector for a myth about giants. Strange. Get this. Gigantopithecus blacki is a giant ape that has only been found, I think, a piece of a jaw, mandible, and some teeth from it. Teeth are very large. The mandible is very stoutly constructed, supposedly. And it is led anthropological paleontologists, if that's a thing, I think it is, to determine that this was a very large ape. Upper limits are like with Megalodon, 11 feet tall if it stood up. Well, an ape that big is going to have trouble standing, I'll bet, but still. Likely a good bit larger than today's bull apes, and they're big. A bull gorilla is a big ape. Anybody? 500 pounds? So yeah, imagine an ape bigger than that. That's big enough. Have you ever seen one of those guys in a zoo, a silverback, an adult male gorilla? They are prodigal. They are packed with muscle that your body lacks. They are like mythical monsters. And of course to the Greeks or to the Latins that only saw one in a coon's age, maybe they were mythical monsters. Now, this Gigantopithecus blacki was even bigger. Imagine that. Imagine an ape that big. there's a credible giant for you. Just if it was on all fours, as an ape on all fours with all those big knuckles in the front, and it was still as tall as you or a little bit taller. Imagine how big that animal is. 1,200 pounds. It's as big as a horse. That's big. That's a giant, don't you think? You think like, oh, if he stood up, that'd be like a cave bear. So there's your credible vector for real giants in our distant past. As far as the current spin on the remains goes, because they're very fragmentary, so how can you tell? But the idea is that these guys lived right at the limits of when humans became humans. 50,000 years, 12,000 years maybe, 18,000 years. Remember the last big ice age, the last Pleistocene epoch receded. The globe warmed up a little bit. That would give us about 12,000 years, 8 to 12,000 years ago. So there were these giant apes in the world, theoretically. I mean, as far as, like I said, fragmentary evidence, and they lead you to believe that it's a pretty big thing. There's some of that with dinosaurs and early crocodilomorphs. They'll find just a fragment and say, like, well, look at that tooth, that thing must have been. But for all we know, maybe it was a short crocodile with 5 giant teeth. Until we find more, we won't know. Anyway, humans, Homo sapiens, were surrounded by other hominid and other homogeneous species. And I believe that we moored and captured and enslaved and raped and worked to death and ate them and indoctrinated the babies as humans. And that's where the little bit of light-colored skin and light-colored eyes and light-colored hair remains in the human genome, because it's a foreign genetic input from a time when we conquered all that was around us. Our little groups of humans could use spears better, arrows better, whatever. We had larger tribes, whatever it was. We pushed them out to the limits of the world and then killed them. We raped them, we enslaved them. And many, many cultures do have a cultural memory, myths, about a period where something like that happened. So I'm not too far out of here with my idea. And it has led me to believe that humans, everywhere you go, look, they have darker skin than I do, they have darker eyes than I do, they have darker hair than I do. The human race is a dark-eyed, dark-haired, and dark-skinned ape. The few tropes that get thrown up in the genetic stew when an occasional negative recombinant recessive happens, when both parents have a gene for light hair, light eyes, and the attendant birth defects that are attached to that, by the way, there are quite a few, then all these things can happen in one person. Sometimes you get genius. Sometimes you get a poet. That I can claim. Sometimes you get a person that is racked with congenital difficulty because that ultra inbred culture, DNA, gives rise to many defects. The spreading out of DNA amongst the whole population tends to make fewer defects and more healthy mutations that come to the fore. And that the populations like mine are isolated populations that reinforce those qualities, both positive and negative, to the point where they're nonsensical. And not to their benefit, because they have more infant mortality, and they have more breast cancer in the women, and they have more. See what I mean? That's all I had to say. I believe that Neanderthals were a real part of human culture, but we didn't treat them kindly. Look at our history with just alien cultures as opposed to alien species. We're pretty mean. So, I'd like to say, let's build a thing called civilization that improves upon that allows us to behave in a new way that isn't raping or exploiting. It's called being civil. And heck, maybe we could all learn to get along. This is Wild Bill, your Neanderthal ambassador, signing off.